Now that you have your AWS account set up and authorized and approved and ready to go, the next step is going to actually be setting up your instance. So let's go ahead and do this. This is going to be a pretty long video because we're going to go through the whole process of setting up an instance. So the first step is to sign into the console, aws.amazon.com. Sign into the console, enter your username, password. If you manage multiple accounts, you can sign into a different account here as well. Sign in, and you're taken to your console. Now, your server is going to live in the EC2 cloud, so you want to go under EC2. It's usually here, or it's up under Services EC2. So I'm going to click there. And you'll see that you have all these different things. And we're going to talk about a lot of the different things in here. But for starting off today, we're going to go to instances. Now I have this previous instance I set up that stopped, so I'm going to go, we're going to set up a new one. So we're going to click this big blue button up at the top called Launch Instance. And that's going to really kick off this 7-step process here for selecting what we want to do. So first thing we need is we need to find a server that's compatible. So if you do tech specs 17 technical specs. Let's go back here. You'll see that we had Windows Server 2016 Standard Edition with desktop experience. That's the one we're going to go for. It's called something slightly different here. It's called Server 2016 Base. And you'll see it's Windows 2016 Data Center Edition. This is the equivalent on the cloud for Standard Edition. So even though it's got a different name, this is the right one. You'll see it's 64-bit. We're going to select that one. Now on the next screen, you're actually going to be choosing the hardware that you're going to use. Now you'll remember that back here on the tech specs, the minimum requirements was a dual-core 8 GB RAM, 80 GB hard drive machine. So you'll see that in here, in Amazon's cloud, the thing that meets the minimum requirements here is T2 large. Now, based on my experience, that's not entirely true. You can install FileMaker Server on a T2 Micro, but just remember that you're going to get what you pay for. So even though a T2 Micro will install and run FileMaker Server, if you have any more than like one user connecting to it, it's going to use up all the processes. It's going to run really slow. You're not going to be happy with it. So usually for groups of 5 or less, we'll start off with a T2 small, see how it looks like. But for most clients, you know, from 2 to 25 users, we're looking at a T2 medium. Above 25 or 20 to 50 users, we're looking at a T2 large. You know, really take a look at what your needs are to estimate. But T2 medium is a good starting point. So let's go to configure instance details. Now you'll notice that as I'm going through at the bottom, I'm hitting next, so I hit each one of these sections. You can skip and hit review to launch. On the instance details, for now, you're really not going to have to worry about any of these settings. The one setting I do want to point out is right in this section, the shutdown behavior. Now this is what happens if you accidentally hit shutdown on your computer. Do not change this to terminate. If you change it to terminate, if you accidentally ever shut off your server, it will just wipe out your server. And that's going to be a huge headache. So just switch it to stop, because then you can just come back into your console and hit start and start it up again. Really, you can check off this box that says protect against accidental termination, but as long as you have this setting up here, this is a little bit more optional. Now, CloudWatch monitoring, I don't use it because I usually use FileMaker Server built-in monitoring, and when things go wrong with FileMaker Server, usually your users are telling you before any automated service is telling you that something is wrong. And let's go to storage next. So storage is going to be where we do drive space. Now remember, FileMaker wants 80 gigs of drive space. Everything else by default here is fine. I usually add a secondary volume called, and leave those there. And the secondary volume is what I use for backups. So we'll usually make that, at least 1.5 to 2 to 3 times larger. So I can put in 160 here. And delete on termination. That's good to do. If you ever terminate your server, it'll delete your drives for you as well, just to make sure. Drive encryption, that can cause problems with FileMaker, so leave it unencrypted. And we're going to go to tags. Tags, they're an optional thing. If you're managing hundreds of servers, tags are useful, but for this course, it's not really useful. Configure security group. This is something we're going to do when we'll talk about it later, but basically I'm going to select one for now that was already done, and we'll come back and talk about it later. So this is where you can actually enter in your FileMaker port rules for the network that your server is on, but we'll talk about this in a future episode. So when we're done, review and launch. Now, if you set up the security group, you might get this message up there. We'll talk about that later. But this is just a review screen, T2 medium, blah, 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 custom role, storage, just double check that everything looks right. And that's it. So now that I've configured kind of this wizard here, I'm going to hit launch, and it's going to launch that key pair. It's going to launch that server. To launch the server, it needs to create a key pair. And what the key pair is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to connect to that server. So I'm going to choose connect, or create a new key pair, do FM master class, and then I'm going to download that key pair. So you'll see that downloads fmmasterclass.pem. So I'll save that file for later. Very important to save that file. If you do not save that file, you won't be able to connect by remote desktop into your server. So save that file, then hit launch. So it'll say your instances are now launching. So, and at the bottom of this, you can view instances. So when I go back there, you'll see that this T2 medium server is now pending. But you see it's already giving me what the public-facing DNS is going to be. This is the IP address I'm going to use to connect to that. If I have multiple servers I'm setting up on my own little private network, I've also got a private IP. And we can really just sit here and wait for it to go. So now you'll see it's a green dot has shown up here. It says it's running. It's still running status checks. It says initializing, but now I'll at least be able to connect to the server. So what we want to do is we want to connect using Microsoft Remote Desktop to access this server. So if you right-click on the instance, you'll see connect. You'll see get Windows password. So we're going to need both of these things. For connect, what we're going to do is we're going to download a remote desktop file. And that gives us an RDP file that we'll be able to use to open up Microsoft Remote Desktop. And you'll see that our username is administrator, and we're going to get password. Now remember that FM masterclass key pair we generated? Well, I'm going to go into my downloads where I saved that. I'm going to open that, and I'm going to hit decrypt password. And it's going to give me the password there. So that's why it's important to save that file. So I'm going to copy that password, and I'm going to hit close, and then we'll be ready to connect. Now to connect to our new server, we're going to use this RDP file that we downloaded from Amazon. Now, while you can double click this and connect directly, I like to have full control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this RDP file into my text editor. I'm using Atom here. And you'll see that really all that's in here is the Amazon EC2 address and the username. And it's got auto connect in here as one. So if you change that to 0, it won't auto connect for you. So if I open up Microsoft Remote Desktop, it's going to give me a list of all my servers, which I'm going to block out for privacy reasons. But up here at the top, you can click New Server. So for this, I'm going to use connection name. We're going to call this FM Server Master Class. The PC name is this host address, so I'm going to copy that. That goes in there. The username is administrator. And the password is the password that we decrypted from our key pair file. Paste that in there. Now, all the rest of the settings that I normally set up here, I don't like doing it in full screen. I like scaling content so that it all shows up in one box. Session, I always like connecting to an admin session. And redirection, I normally will map a folder here to my desktop so that when I'm on my server, I have access to my desktop as a drive on the server, and that lets me copy files back and forth. So that's an easy way to get file access to the server over this remote connection. So that's all I've got there. So now that I've got FileMaker Server, I'll scroll down my list and double click it in the list. You'll see that it'll ask me if I trust this computer. We haven't actually set up an SSL certificate, so I'm going to get a certificate warning the first time I connect. I'm going to click Connect. Here's that certificate warning. I'm going to click Continue. And if all goes well, boom, here we go. You have a Windows server set up on Amazon. Ooh, if you see this, notice here, networks, that it wants your server to be discoverable by other computers on the networks. Click No. That's a good security setting to start with. So that is setting up your instance, and now that you've set up your instance, we're ready to start configuring things.